Welcome to everyone. If you could be muting yourself upon entry in the meeting, that would be great. We'll start an introduction in a few minutes. All right, as we get started and people continue to join into the call, I want to start with a little bit of introduction on how the meeting is going to run. So we are recording the event. We are not going to be sharing with the public. It's only going to be available for you all to receive after the call. If you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to ask your question. Not to disturb sort of the running of the event, I invite you to either raise your hand or write your question in the Q&A box, and then we'll record all the questions and we'll ask them on the second part of the meeting during the Q&A with the audience. I've already stated if you can mute yourself, that would be great. We will unmute you as question arises, but just for the quality of the meeting and being able to hear all of our speakers, we ask that you do that. We're gonna do a 40-minute Q&A with our speakers, our 4 speakers, and then we'll do a 20-minute Q&A with the audience. And then after that, we'll go into 10 to 15 minutes of networking. So we'll split into breakout rooms for the networking. I will be sharing the contact information of those that are within that group of 4 or 5 in the networking breakout rooms. If you don't want your contact information to be shared, please either email me or send a message to Valerie Williams in the chat box so that we can remove you from the communication. And then if you want to learn more about Athlete Soul and some of the events that we have available to support athlete, you can go on our website at athletesoul.space. I'm going to take a few more minutes because we still have a participant waiting. And then I'll introduce you guys to our speakers for today. We have a fantastic panel. Okay. So still a few people joining. Go. Okay, so I'll start with our speakers for today. We have a fantastic panel, as I said, of speakers that have covered and worked with athletes in different spaces. So we're covering the collegiate space, youth, professional athletes, Olympic athlete, in the field of player development. So really excited to hear from all of you guys, and welcome to our panel today, to Lauren, Alex, Michael, and Erika. And I'm going to present you one by one. But first of all, thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your experience and knowledge today. It's much appreciated. So I'll start with Lauren. So Lauren is a sports psychology consultant. She's worked with athletes of many different levels through her career, from youth sport to Olympian, professional athlete, Division I athlete. She has a master in sports psychology from the University of Utah. She also has a master in mental health counseling and a PhD in sports psychology from the University of Tennessee. She currently works with her private practice, Pyramid Performance Consulting, and obviously has a unique background as both a mental health counselor and a sports psychology consultant. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I'm moving on to Michael Sagas. He's a professor of sport management at the University of Florida and has been since 2008. He's the faculty athletics representative to the NCAA. He focuses his research on athlete development, specifically identity development and the sport career transition. He's a former collegiate baseball athlete and coach. Welcome. Erika Fay is a certified life mastery consultant, a licensed psychotherapist, and success coach. She has over 20 years experience working with professional and amateur athletes, entrepreneurs, and business professionals around the world. She's passionate about helping athletes create their ideal result inside and outside of sport for more freedom, fulfillment, and prosperity. She played collegiate water polo at Purdue University and now is an avid endurance athlete. And I should add too that she's one of Athlete's Soul transition coaches. And finally, Alex Auerbach is currently the director of clinical and sports psychology of the University of Arizona, but he's also moving into a new job with the Toronto Raptors. He's a licensed psychologist who has been providing sports psychology services for the last 8 years at the collegiate and professional level. And as I say, he's just been named Director of Wellness and Development for the Toronto Raptors. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for joining us today. So we have a few people still joining us. I'm going to allow them to come in. And we're going to jump right into our conversation on basically, there's been a lot going on in the last few months, and I'm sure you guys have been extremely busy on the forefront, both for athletes and generally in counseling communities. So it's really interesting that we have such a mixed background and experiences with you guys at both the collegiate, professional, and education level. And so what we want to talk about today really is your experience of this whole crisis, and we want to learn from what you have seen and how we can better improve in the next few months. It's going to be quite a few challenging months, probably for even a couple of years. So wanted to start straight away on based on your experience, what you see as the biggest challenges that athletes have faced in the last few months. We can start, whoever can jump in, or maybe we can start with Lauren.
Thanks. I was trying to think. A couple of things I've seen, I mean, depending on the level. So like some of the youth athletes, the coaches are taking the time to do dry land, but also kind of introduce mental training, which is a good opportunity right now. With some of the professional athletes, managing their time, they've actually been more busy with sponsorship obligations, because now there's this perception that there's nothing they're doing at home, and so that they can be on social media and fulfill all these sponsorship obligations. So I would say some of the athletes I'm working on are probably busier. One of the tougher things is also with that, by posting on social media, there's been some kind of shaming, like you're not wearing a mask, you are wearing a mask, as they're just trying to do the best they can and, still work out at the level that they need to sport. It's kind of both spectrums, I guess, right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Erika, I see you nod. Do you want to jump in, or anything that you have seen or heard?
Well, yeah, and definitely everything that Lauren has said. And then one of the other kind of from the psychological aspect of things, it seems like, there has been, for some athletes, again, depending on the level, a loss. People are experiencing some grieving, especially seniors who are, have had their seasons kind of yanked away from them, and just kind of having a difficulty with closure, because kind of not having any, I guess, traditional closure. and, you know, some uncertainty around kind of what's next. And, you know, if for those seniors who are, you know, at the end of their season or aren't going to have an opportunity to continue to progress in their sport, you know, then the identity piece is kind of coming up. If someone has kind of really defined themselves from just being an athlete, kind of now in a little bit of a defining situation, and really looking at how they can, you know, who are they, and all of those questions that come along with that. So there's a lot of uncertainty, it seems, and obviously there's uncertainty in the general population as well, but uncertainty is a really big thing.
Yeah. You went quiet at the end. But yeah, absolutely. Loss of control, uncertainty, lack of closure. Alex, is there anything that you see specifically at the collegiate level that we haven't touched on yet?
I think the grief and loss has been a really big one, but I think one that started to emerge particularly more recently as the isolation or quarantine has continued on has been dealing with loneliness and dealing with being disconnected from teammates, not being able to connect with coaches or staff in the same ways that they would ordinarily. And I think now, as we're talking about college sports sort of restarting and re-entering, we're starting to have a unique conversation about what student athletes are going to be welcome or not welcome back on campus for safety's sake. And then I think you're sort of pairing that with the grief and loss that Erika was touching on, where there's sort of this, like, am I going to be allowed to come back? Am I able to participate? When can I participate? Will we hit sort of wave number 2 before I get that chance? And what will that mean? So I think that's been a particularly interesting intersection too, as the loneliness sort of wages on. And I think to speak to something Lauren mentioned that I think is important, is I think there's a sort of strange balance between sort of like representing how to appropriately respond to the crisis, like needing to be role models in the community, while also suffering sort of the grief and loss and missing out on what they love most. And so I think that's been particularly challenging as well.
And Michael, is there anything that you want to add from your perspective as a professor?
Yeah, well, I'm just the athletes on our campus. I don't think it's any different than the faculty on our campuses. People, there's just so much ambiguity right now, uncertainty, doubt. And I think I noticed too, there's a good level of frustration just across the board. They just, like you said, we don't know if they're coming June 8th, June 15th. We don't know if they may have to quarantine, they may not. We may restart and have to restop. I mean, it's just, it's led to a lot of frustration. The ambiguity has led to a lot of frustration. And athletes are not really comfortable with ambiguity. I've found over the years, they like structure. They like being told what to do, even if it's voluntold. It's at least there's something I need. I know what to eat. I know where to go. I know what time I need to be there and there. And all that has just kind of disappeared. It's left this kind of emptiness beyond the uncertainty, where I'd call it confusion and ambiguity would be how I'd follow up on that.
Yeah, and you know, Alex mentioned the role model part that athletes sort of have additional pressure, right? They're facing all these emotions that are basically similar to everybody else, but they're probably heightened because of the importance of their identity as athletes. And on top of that, they have the pressure of still being a role model within their sport, within their community, within their schools. I want to switch a little bit to more the practical and the solution, because it's really what we want to dive into today. From your perspective of what you have put in place, either on the school campus or in your private practice, can you share some tips or practical resources that you have used to help athletes during this time, or that we can continue to use as we move forward? Anybody want to jump in?
Sure, I'll take a stab. Or Michael, you want to go?
No, you're up. I was calling on you.
Oh, lucky me. So I think one thing I've found, I'll try not to run through all the strategies that we've used so I can leave some room, because I'm sure there's a lot of overlap. But I think one thing I've found to be particularly helpful for the athletes I've been working with at this time has been setting pretty strategic and concrete goals. I think there's been a lot of talk about sort of just maintaining consistency, routine, and that stuff. And I'm sure some other folks will touch on that. But I think having something that athletes can consistently work toward, both on the personal side of their life, whether it's spending more time connecting with family, teammates, whatever, or working on performance stuff in their sport, having something that they can really focus on, that they can control, that they can start to measure some degree of achievement has been, I think, fairly helpful for maintaining motivation and kind of engagement, what they need to stay engaged in. And it has been something that I think in the broader media has been relatively talked about less. So that's something that I've done that's been, I think, pretty practical. I'll let you go now, Michael. Take it away.
Our camp, a lot of resources have been devoted to this. I've noticed the ones that are working well, it's really the coach that's holding this together. I'm speaking from an NCAA perspective. We get the 8 hours a week of this virtual world. They're literally spending hours and hours and hours of meetings like this, trying to have some sense of community and some community of practice, hold each other accountable. It strikes me that started out well, and it's gotten more challenging. I mean, the world is not 2D and the world is not flat. It's really difficult to always communicate through this medium, but they've been, the coaches have done a really good job. I mean, most athletes have done well. Like always, I think the coach can really help an athlete's mental health, and the coach can absolutely ruin all the work that these great practitioners do with athletes. The coach can undo a lot of that, and a single comment sometimes doesn't even take very long. The only other thing I've been recommending, this is from the more the research perspective, so we teach a career transition class. I sat in on one of them, the professor in there is on the far end, and we went around the room, talked about what they're feeling exactly. We just talked about here: doubt, anxiety, frustration, ambiguity, and it struck me that's exactly how their career transition is going to feel. Those are exact same comments you feel when you talk to an athlete and their career is over. Some of these athletes actually their career was over because we had them in a career transition class in the middle of the semester. Some of them they ended. It was over. Many of them are coming back. So I've been using that as a chance every time I remind them, think about how you feel now and how you're coping now. It's going to feel very different. So at least you're aware of the transition challenges that are coming. And a lot of the same practical advice works: planning, goal setting, optimism, that will help you later in life. So just kind of as a learning tool to kind of plant the seed for a future learning opportunity.
Erika, do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Alex and Michael said was awesome. The concrete goals and the addressing the feelings. And, one of the things that I've been seeing too is the kind of virtual connections that they've been able to make with or have with their teams. Just any sort of additional connection. And even if it's kind of like checking in on whatever individual workouts and having somebody holding them accountable, that's also really useful. And one of the things that I've also been encouraging my athletes to do is just, like Michael said, talk about how it is that they're feeling. Because identifying the feeling is one thing, and then actually being able to verbalize it is another. And just kind of normalizing the whole process of, the different feelings that are coming up right now, and, making it a safe space to be able to talk about it. And some of them have been able to talk with each other about, how they're feeling. And then, it's kind of a fine line, because I also talk with them about not getting stuck in the grief, but also, being able to recognize that it's there and acknowledge it and know that, as things continue to unfold and change, there's always going to be, moving parts. So the feelings piece is really important. And I think the connection in terms of how they're feeling is connected to their teammates and their coach and, each other is another really big piece.
Lauren, do you want to add something?
I kind of wrote it on the chat, but one thing, everybody's talking about grief and different than Mike talked about ambiguity. There is a lot of research on ambiguous loss that goes back to starting during the Vietnam War, but I think it almost, we're talking about grief, but this research expresses that this is actually like more difficult than grief because it's not finite. And being able to kind of explain that and talk through that with different individuals who are really struggling. There's also the element of the athlete, I think, somewhere of them just saying like, I'm good, because that's what they're supposed to say, and that's what they do, right? And so having, for the athletes I work with, this platform isn't that off for them. They travel all over the world. That quite often I rarely see the individuals I work with in person. So this part isn't that different, but it's some of them also, they're not traveling, they're at home. They have now rules they haven't had to follow for a long time. Also, I think the practical things of just the day-to-day that is so different from what their norm is typically. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. If you're back at home after 3 years in college, that would definitely bring some different pressure and a different daily structure for sure. I like what you said about the fact that you have athletes and student athletes that are used to the technology and the virtual connection, and that's not that piece is not so difficult perhaps. It's the other aspect. I wanted to go ahead, Lauren, did you want to add something else?
One practical thing is, you guys were talking about those athletes who are transitioning. One thing I've talked to, practical thing is like, there are a lot of conferences that are now free. So if they're looking into transitioning into a certain field, look at what those conferences are. They're doing them virtual, they're doing remote. Like this is great, when you are offering this networking, but a lot of, different industries are really providing, there's a lot more free than there probably ever has been. And at some point it will have to go back to pay. But, if there's a conference before this, Mike and I were talking about a conference that we go to in New York. There's a lot of young athletes who can't maybe afford to do that, attend that, all these different things. So looking for those opportunities as far as a professional development standpoint and I think because people are at home and trying to help, there is that opportunity to network a little bit more.
Yeah. And I want to bounce back to on this and what Michael said on the coaches being in the front line, the sports psychologist, and as well as the athlete development specialists. And so do you have any recommendation, all of you guys, on what do they need to be focusing on moving forward for the coming months? What challenges do you expect? Because we're probably going to be moving a little bit away from that grieving process into some different emotions and different things. How can coaches and support staff be more proactive and helpful to athletes? Anybody want to start?
I'll say one thing I think which is an ongoing thing, is focusing on their own mental health. In that, there's this need to be there for everyone else, as we all are. But, this is also a high time for everyone to get burnt out, and the stressors and the different things. So, also the industry has to support one another.
Yeah. Alex, any advice?
The thing that's come up most for me has been both providing education for athletes and also being really clear and direct in communication. So I think for coaches, sometimes it can be challenging to acknowledge that maybe you don't have all the information, or that you don't know, or you have to make difficult decisions about who's coming back and when. But I think sometimes in that discomfort, there's a tendency to sort of talk around issues, or fail to address the real concerns that are emerging. And so I think it's really critical that coaches, athlete development specialists, all support staff really are one, kind of unified in the message and clear on the understanding of what's being communicated. And then two, are really direct and asking to make sure the athletes are understanding what's being communicated. Because I think there's also a lot of room for interpretation on, what does it mean for student athlete A to come back and student athlete B is stuck? Like, does that mean that student athlete B is not going to get to play, or not going to start, or did they lose their role, or is there something else going on? And so I think being just as transparent, maybe more transparent than we've ever thought we've needed to be, I think would be really important.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because everything is we have a lot of conflicting messages out there right now from every direction, and so I think being able to have a clear message and be transparent with the athletes so they can actually make decision on and have the information to be able to make decision moving forward is going to be a big aspect in reducing uncertainty and ambiguity for the next few months. Erika or Michael, is there anything you want to add on that topic? Maybe Michael, on the what would be most impactful in the field of athlete development?
Yeah, so there's a question coming up later if we get to it about would we learn, and what does, how do we get better next time this happens? And it has struck me how unprepared we were for this. Not just, every sector of society was. It's not pointing a finger at the sport industry at all, but we had a business model. It's pretty straightforward. We recruit these kids, you put them in a stadium, people pay and they come, and all that has just been thrown out, and the athletes are at the center of this ecosystem and have suffered the majority of that angst and they said the ambiguity and the loss. So it strikes me that, the athlete development specialist, the sports psychologist, licensed psychologists, and mental health professionals aren't there all the time. They're not in the trenches. So the front line is, I'd still say, it's the coach, maybe the athletic trainer. So I think we've learned, even now in this interim, that education, resources that they can count on, like you tell a coach, you need to restore resilience in your players when they come back. They don't know what that is, right? They're going to get them fit, and they're going to get them healthy, and they're going to do the X's and O's, the strategic, technical, tactical stuff. They're not, and not every coach, most coaches don't have a bench of sports psychologists, licensed mental health professionals. They can call into a Zoom room or a practice when they come back. So it is more important than ever now, I think, that education is happening and continuous learning. We're going to learn a lot from this. That could be, we'd be real ashamed if we make the same mistakes in the future. And like Lauren said, it's not even over. This could get worse before it gets better, So there could be a really challenging fall semester. And I'm speaking now again in the college space, and I'll defer in the professional world to Alex and Lauren. But we did some of this. The WTA is a good example as a practical experience. So they're paying for up to 20 of their athletes to take our athlete development academy to get licensed. They're not licensed. It's a certified athlete development specialist through PADS. That was really nice, and they're engaged. These are like some of the best students I've ever had. I had this first assignment, just to give you an example, it's 2 to 3 pages. And this 21-year-old tennis athlete turned in 19 pages. She was taking it serious. She's learning about herself. She's investing in herself. And then we opened another one, an academy. We have actually several coaches in there. So it's a great opportunity. Like I said, there's so many webinars, seminars that are free, like Lauren was saying. And now really value education and continuous learning and keep it going. Don't just, once practice starts, I think a lot of these coaches and frontline people are just going to stop, go back to business as usual. There is no business as usual anymore, I would argue. It's the new normal.
Yeah. And I, as you said, we will go deeper into what this all means in the field of athlete development and support. But before we do that, I wanted to hear from you guys what you think maybe the challenges that the athletes will face and the industry will face in the next few months. What do you expect? And and at every level of sport, whether it's the colleges, Olympic and professional athletes, everybody's affected by this. Erika, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, well, the obvious thing is the transformation of the competition experience. I mean, if there's at every level, not having fans in the stadium, or not paying people who are actually there to watch and cheer, the energy that maybe a lot of athletes kind of derive from being in that type of environment, that may shift, and it's looking like it's going to, with the lack of stadiums being allowed to open. But so I think that's an obvious one. And, you know, so like transformation of their experience of playing the sport, if they get to compete, I think, you know, that's something that we want to pay attention to, allow for conversation around. So that's kind of the major one that I see. And then obviously, you know, if the sport is not allowed to run at all, then there's, again, the ambiguous loss, and everything that goes along with that.
Lauren or Alex, do you want to jump in on what you expect?
Sure, I don't mind jumping in. I'm expecting a persistent avoidance of people talking about the very real fear of coronavirus, and working in an environment that doesn't really support people speaking up about being afraid to participate. So I expect like student athletes to sort of reluctantly come back, some of them, and still be very afraid and not really know who to talk to about that, or express difficulty talking about that, because some of their teammates are also going to be pretending like they're not afraid. And so I think as professionals, it's sort of incumbent upon us to think about how we're going to address that and to sort of name it and create space to talk about it. Because I think it's there, and you'll see publicly, like even some pro sports players are coming out and talking about, well, I'm worried about getting it, or I'm not sure I'm going to come back. But I think there's going to be an overwhelming amount of pressure, both financially across the board and interpersonally, for sports to sort of resume. And there's maybe some benefits to that. Like I think people get a sense of normalcy from sports on a calendar. But I think there's also going to be a lot of people who don't fully understand the risks, or sort of reluctantly accept the risks of participating. So I think that part is going to be particularly challenging. And I think that will be sort of doubled up. This is just like a personal opinion, but I think it's fairly inevitable that we're going to have student athletes that contract coronavirus. And then I think we're going to have to address that again. And the same thing at the professional level, and thinking about how we're going to navigate that and what that means for the people who are in contact, but also what that means for the different leagues and conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a big piece what you're bringing up, because there's many different opinions on whether to go back to sport, and you'll have the athletes who don't want to be at home and will be willingly going back to campus, and you'll have those who are really more afraid about what's going on. And this is really possibly going to bring some intense conflict within teams, within the student athlete body, or even sort of ostracizing some of the athletes in their group of peers as well, which will lead to other consequences. Lauren, did you want to add to it? I saw you nod a few times at what Alex was saying. Do you want to jump in?
I think, I mean, it's just that overarching of fear, like he was saying, the financial ramifications. So even just in the performing arts, you know, the seasons were completely canceled. And so it's not only the financial of, will I make money, but will the performing arts keep going? Will they have, you know, like here's something, this one athlete I was talking to said, you know, this has been my dream forever. I'm finally at this, you know, point, and it might all go away. You know, and the financial implications to what can do in terms of whether or not a recession comes, and all these different things, not just how it's going to hit the athletes, but how it's going to hit just the sports industry has been hit anyways prior to this, you know, and different things. And so there's a lot of concern, I think, for the coaches, for, you know, just in terms of livelihood. And then that's, like we were saying, education side of now there's that, have I prepared for any transition at all? That may be, you know, kind of more abrupt than possible. I think also for you, there's a lot of talk about the team athletes, but the individual athletes, it's almost even more isolation, you know, like now everyone's riding a chairlift by themselves. That's the time, you know, the social aspect of even the individual sports is one of the things that draws them there. And now it's going to be, you know, like I said, riding a chairlift by yourself, or which, not that they don't do it, but they don't do it all day, every day, which may be the case now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've heard a lot from you guys, you know, still the uncertainty, the fear of the virus, but also the change in how your sport is being played, probably much less travels than they've ever had. You know, how all of this affect their relationship with their coaches, with their peers on campus. There's a lot of ambiguity that we're going to see over the next few months. So do you think that this situation obviously has put a spotlight on what you guys do and on the athlete development, and perhaps even the necessity to develop the whole athlete? Do you see this situation as bringing radical changes to athlete development and sports psychology and mental health, or is this the chance for you guys to like have more impact or influence in the performance and the well-being of the athletes? Michael, do you want to jump in, since that's the question you were waiting for?
Yeah, I stole most of my thunder already though, but I would, everything I said earlier, I agree that there has to be more continuous learning, more frontline continuous learning. I think the one thing that maybe we have learned that we can do from here and forever, I mean, is resource-rich environments, providing an opportunity for resource-rich environments. So it's something that we can do in our athlete development field forever. I think it's too early to know, Miriam, though, we'll see what the outcome is. If this gets worse and we see athletes, I mean, really having struggles, then we'll know that, you know, we have to do way more. It'll justify the Laurens, Alex, and Erikas that, they're just as important as an assistant coach. Every team would have to have an athlete development, performance, mental health support staff. I mean, we just don't know yet. But if I had to guess, 2 months in, I don't know, radical is probably too strong of a word, but it's definitely a strong nudge, psychologically speaking, that we need to invest in some resources. And now is not the time at all. We're going through some serious budget cuts. I mean, professional sports, collegiate sports, consultants got cut pretty much out of our entire budget this year for the Gators. So it's now it's not for student athletes. It's consultants for just about every other area of our business. But now is not the time to be cutting this. It's time to actually ramp it up, and we'll see. I mean, if you did this in a year, I hope maybe we'll know just how important the athlete development specialists and sports psychologists, mental health practitioners. I'm curious to hear what the three of you in the field have to say about that, though. Lauren.
Me.
Want to start?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think, like you said, consultants are being cut. I think there is definitely a need and there's this desire, but the last recession we went through in 2007, 2008, that was not tied to all this. As we look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people, I'm seeing even just clients who are like, I just can't, with the unknown of their parents working, unknown of school, unknown of whatever, this is not their primary thing they're going to pay for. when they're worried about rent and different things. Now, not to say that there's a huge need and it can be really beneficial and helpful, but I think we're going to see a little bit of that as well, like a downtick in some ways, because of people's financial concerns. A lot of parents are tightening their strings, and I saw that back in 2007, 2008, unfortunately. So I think there's the education of still needs, but the reality of it in that, not every university has the opportunity to have mental health counselors and sports psychologists for their staff prior to this. And while they cut budgets, that, we're going to have to keep working to keep that momentum going, because it was being added in a lot of places with athlete development specialists and what. That was an uplifting thing.
Alex, do you want to jump in and tell us what you have seen at the University of Arizona, and what you think, if there's going to be any changes to the industry?
I hope so. I hope that there's growth in what we do. I think I agree with Michael. I think we're probably still a little ways away from knowing what the real outcome of this is going to be. I don't know if traditional college athletics, like we've known it for the last several years, is going to continue, or we're going to continue to see sport programs across the country kind of be cut. And I think that will influence a lot of what's available and how things are resourced. I do know a couple years ago, the Pac-12 led a great initiative to try to get all Division I institutions to at least identify a mental health practitioner on every campus. And so the thing I'm hopeful for, and that I think has come out of this, is a little bit more willingness to advertise that there is support and that there are people here to help. And I hope that that continues, because I think even just having an outcome where it's a little bit more integrated into individual programs, or spoken about or talked about as an important thing and a normal thing for student athletes to seek support, I think is a really, really good outcome. And I know I've seen at Arizona, groups that I wouldn't have anticipated inviting myself or the staff here into their space just to talk about what's going on, has been somewhat surprising, but really rewarding to be welcomed into those different spaces. And so I hope that continues. And I think at the very least we've shown that what we do really matters, and that there's a need to have somebody connected, and that it's not just a frill, but is a really important integral part of a successful department in managing crises and delivering effective support to student athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. The work that you guys all do is super, super critical, and it definitely shows in this space right now. I agree with all of you in the sense that we are in a reset period. We not out of the crisis. We don't know yet if there's going to be a second wave, and how is this going to look like. So it's definitely that's going to be an ongoing conversation. I want to jump into the questions because we have quite a few questions already, and perhaps the first one could be for Erika. We have a question from Brian, and he's asking us, how does a lack of vulnerability and denial play a role in the process for athletes during this time? He's saying, it seems that a lot of athletes are saying, I'm okay, as opposed to be perceived as weak, and saying, they're probably thinking they're struggling, but they're not saying it. We've touched on this a little bit earlier. Can you talk to us a little bit about that athlete mindset of not necessarily sharing your emotion, and how can we deal and support that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there is that, it could be said, I guess, athlete mentality to kind of just push past the pain and not feel it. And, that oftentimes can serve athletes in sport. And the culture of kind of lack of vulnerability is definitely something that I think, even by having these types of conversations and having resources such as these available for athletes to kind of be able to access, so that conversation around vulnerability can kind of begin or be had. We, you know, with, oh, can you hear me? I just got a message that
Yes,
my
we
internet
can.
connection was unstable, so I wanted to make sure you can hear me. So yeah, oh, great, okay. The vulnerability piece is definitely huge. And I would say that, you know, with conversation and with support, you know, again, I think looking at the coach to kind of, like Lauren was saying, if the coach's mental health is on point, this is going to trickle down too. Like having coaches be open to having conversations about, you know, what's going on with the athlete, and not that they need to go into a big, deep conversation about their mental health. Just beginning to open the door for these conversations to be had, because I mean, it is true, like especially virtual, and someone's telling us they're okay, and you can't really observe them, you're not going to be given much to go on. But I think it's important just to continue to lay the groundwork and again, have conversations like these be readily accessible for athletes to see, like, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And then those who are, you know, who have a platform to actually, you know, raise awareness on the importance of being vulnerable, and actually how looking at, you know, addressing certain feelings could actually support you in your full spectrum development and wellness is another, I think,
we actually have a question on
right now.
You're talking about platform, Erika, and we had a question on tools and platform available, and I guess it's for all of you guys. We obviously in a fragmented situation right now where people are dispersed around the country, is not necessarily, you know, they're connecting virtually, but one person has a question around if you know how to provide peer support for an extended period of time and staying physically and mentally engaged. Is there any example of existing platform that you know of that you could share with the audience, something they can use for both physical and mental support and engagement? Anything that comes to mind, or do you think it's mostly provided at the school level?
Well, there's obviously go ahead.
Go ahead, Erika, sorry.
No, I was just going to say there's obviously mental health apps now. But I think, you know, one of the pieces that is really important with the mental health component is the athlete feeling like they have a connection with the person who they're talking to. So the relationship component is a really big piece of things. So, you know, my hope is that this does shine the light on the need for additional athlete development specialists. And I know with the budget cuts and things like that, it can be a challenge. But I think, you know, really having an awareness now of, you know, these athletes are people and they have needs, and needs need to be addressed. And, you know, putting things in place so that that can happen, I think is a really important piece. And getting someone in who is relatable, who the athletes feel comfortable talking to, because if that's not there, then it's going to be a limit to how much is actually accomplished and how much help it can actually receive.
Erika, you're cutting off a little bit. Anybody wants to jump in or any example on the
can I
resources?
jump
Yes,
in quick before Lauren? But one of the things I failed to say in your last question is really innovation. I think is the future. It's what we're learning that we do lacks in innovation. Zoom is as good as we can do to keep people together. Now, Zoom is awesome. Don't get me wrong. Like, we couldn't do this 4 years ago, and we could barely do it now because of Wi-Fi connections and things. it's hard. But even if everyone's video's up, it's a limited platform for engagement. Now, I know in mental health world, telehealth's been around for decades, right? And it's here to stay. In the coach-athlete relationship, and and professors talking to their students, it's not as common. We like to see things and feel things and experience things and be close to people. So innovation, I think, is necessary. I hope to see maybe some AI kind of applications in the future. Maybe this will stimulate some people to think more around. We can collect data on athletes in real time and give them customized kind of mental health practices and advice, and intervene and run interference at the timely manner. Betsy Cutler's on the call, I see, and her app has been a really nice addition to the portfolio. I think available to your last question from Stacy. What are some turnkey options that are already available? There are a few, but there are not many. Many times right now it's referral. Go to your insurance, see who's your psychologist, and if you're lucky enough that your athletic department employs somebody, go see that person. There's privacy issues, there's stigma issues, there's timing issues. A lot of college campuses are still sending them to the main campus mental health, student mental health counseling services. And there's stigma there and challenges there and timing and waiting lists, weeks and weeks to get in. So if we could cut that out, all those barriers to getting and headwinds to getting mental health through technology, through other innovations, it is. So I don't have an answer. The best platform I know of is actually probably Betsy's that is ready now. There may be some peer-to-peer mentoring kind of social, I don't know. I don't know what the kids are talking about nowadays, but my kids seem still pretty connected through this. And, but it's the older demographics that are really struggling with that. Lauren, what were you going to say? Sorry.
I lost it.
Oh, I was going to ask you, is there a platform? Do you recommend platforms to athletes? Or Alex, do you recommend?
I usually go with whatever they want to do, but I know there's also, it's different mental health versus sports psych because of HIPAA. And a lot of the platforms are not HIPAA compliant. Even Zoom, the Zoom HIPAA platform is actually quite expensive. So, it's also depending on what you're working on, depends on what, but then a lot of them, they all like their own, they don't want to sign into something new and add into something new. So, I don't know. Like I said, there's so many, like a lot of them just have group text going. A lot of them have group Snapchats going. A lot of them have, I don't even know what they're all doing TikTok things. The one thing in terms of making ourselves more relevant in that is sending reminders and different things through those platforms.
Alex, were you going to add anything to any recommendation for specific platform that you know of? Otherwise, I'll jump into.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have a tech platform to recommend, but in terms of the peer support, I can just say from an institutional standpoint, we have a great student athlete advisory committee that's really dedicated to mental health, and we also have a mental health subgroup. And so in terms of peer-to-peer support, I see leveraging both of those groups as sort of a platform for helping student athletes stay connected and support one another. It's not quite the tech question, but I think we've done whatever we can to leverage existing things, Twitter, email, Zoom, whatever, to try to make the most of it. But I'm not aware of anything beyond Teamworks and things like that for sort of communication things.
Yeah, and I think there are many different aspects to the support. Now, obviously, there's the mental health aspect and the therapist and practitioner, but there's also the education, like Michael said, and the wellness space, I think, is really important in encouraging those athletes to continue to exercise daily, to take care of themselves, self-care, sleep, structure, and daily routine. I think has also a great positive impact on their mental well-being. So that's important too. Michael mentioned that we have Betsy Cutler on the call. That's a great platform to look at. She's got the mental health link app for athletes, and so really encourage, if you don't have any service available for your university, that's probably a good one to get started with, I think. I've seen also a lot of, at least in the Olympic space, I've seen a lot of NGB starting having partnership with Talkspace and offering that to their athlete as a support service. So that, you know, there are little steps in the right direction. With athletes, though, we have education webinar available every week on different topics, and that's something that you guys can go back to all the time. It's evergreen on our website for free, so you can just go back and have a look at the different topics that we've been covering, either on mental health or life skills. There's a lot of information available. We have an interesting comment and question that relates to the coaches who, you know, are on the front line, probably struggling themselves, and that shouldn't really be expected to act as mental health professionals for the athletes. And in the comment, we also have the person is saying there's a big issue between the different type of language and communication that is, or terminology that is used between coaches and athletes. So I guess there's two comments here related. One, you know, to the coaches' well-being, the fact that they're on the front line, providing support to their athletes, but not necessarily being a mental health professional. Do you have any recommendation on what could coaches do or to be better prepared and communicate well with their athlete? How have you dealt with this in your school, Alex?
The first recommendation is sleep. Coaches are notoriously terrible sleepers and don't do it often. So that's a simple one. Like, try to use this time to sort of reset and catch up. I mean, I think it's difficult to, at least at a university space, because really our job revolves more around providing direct care to the student athletes. And so sometimes I think coaches can be more reluctant to reach out and at least express like an interest in additional resources. And so one of the things we've done is try to really advertise other resources available to all staff, and point coaches in the direction of those resources. So we have a group on campus that provides free counseling to any staff person on campus. The state of Arizona has had some healthcare companies that are offering free telehealth through their health insurance, so you could find like specific providers. We have our own in-house, referral network that we use for student athletes, where some of those providers have offered to also meet with our coaches, and some have a history of meeting with our coaches. And so we've made them available for consultation or questions. And then in terms of the communication piece, for me, I think it's really more on me as a practitioner to figure out how to best mesh my language with the coach's language, because the coach is really the point of contact. The coach sees them much more than I do. And so my goal is not necessarily to get the coach to speak the way that I speak, but to think more about how I can blend what I'm doing with what they're doing to support the student athlete's development. And so if we're having coaches talk about taking care of themselves, I've asked coaches to share how they're taking care of themselves, for example, as a way to start to move that process forward. So just a couple of things.
Michael, do you want to add anything that you have seen on your campus?
Yeah, so we have a psychologist that we bring in. I mentioned that works with our transition class. We're working now with our PhD students, another group of high performers that are suffering through the same kind of ambiguity and challenges. And she's told me several times she'd much prefer to work with the coach than with the athletes themselves in a performance setting. And a lot of times, disguised in a performance kind of facade is really mental health, kind of just personal development and personal excellence to get to that performance excellence. yeah, it just strikes, in this country, as you know, Miriam, our coaches are undereducated, overpaid. No offense to anyone on the call. And I think given way too much power, especially in collegiate sport. Professional sport, with unions and things, that gets balanced, but they have way too much power. With that power, they can do a lot of good, and they can do a lot of bad. So that double-edged sword analogy, metaphor that Lauren mentioned. So we really do, now is not the time to be cutting resources to coaches. They speak their own language. They are also terrified of the future, frankly. A lot of, if we don't play women's soccer, our women's soccer coach probably won't have a job, and if we don't play football, there's going to be a lot of them without a job here come, at the end of fall. We're going to furlough and cut and slash. We have no choice. It's just really, that's 80% of our revenue. So it is a very uncertain time for coaches as well. Plus you're asking them, like Betsy's point in that question, to be a mental health kind of mitigator, or at least some maintenance around mental health, and maybe pull in and refer when they need to. So I would focus more so on the coach at this time, not less so. And then they do need to take care of themselves, and they're notoriously very bad at doing that. They say they don't eat well, they don't sleep well, they're workaholics, and now is not the time to be abandoning that core stakeholder group, regardless of why they have that much power. But the fact that they do, we have to deal with it.
Yeah. And I think this is critically important. Someone had a last question, and I'm going to wrap it up before we go into the networking groups. But the question was related to perhaps the fear of having more injuries. And I think this linked to what you guys have talked about in coaches taking care of themselves, athletes taking care of themselves, both physically and mentally. Because, it's possible that we may see more injuries coming back into sport after so many months away and off in a different type of schedule and format. So it seems that the message is really to be super proactive in terms of wellness and both for the coaches and for the coaches to be role models in that message of taking care of yourself and encouraging wellness. So I'm gonna wrap it up. We're gonna go back together after the networking just for the closing, but we're now gonna break into our little rooms. We've prepared rooms already. There's some of you that didn't join, so I'm gonna have to shuffle people around a little bit. So if you can bear with me for a few minutes, and we'll be breaking into rooms for about 10 minutes, and then you'll be back into the main one. If you gotta go, you can jump off if you want.
Okay, I will do that.
Much.
But please make me available to anyone that needs anything. Share my email widely. Happy to be a resource.
I will. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex.
You got it. Take care, y'all. Thanks for hosting. This was awesome.
Thank you.
This is fantastic. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully this was valuable and you made some good connection. We have a few people coming back still from the room. I wanted to make sure that we said thank you. But to all of you, thank you so much for participating, especially to our speakers. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the discussion. We probably will be hosting a few more in the upcoming months. We're trying to stay connected and learn from each other. And these are not easy time for everybody. So trying to be creative and to see what others are doing. So watch out for our platform. We'll probably have some more opportunities like this. But thank you, Lauren, Michael, Erika, and Alex had to jump off, but thanks to him as well. And then look out for the follow-up email. We'll be sharing the recording as well as the contact of everybody. So thanks again for participating. You guys stay safe. Take care of yourself. And hope to see you again. Bye, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much.